Welcome back to Crypto Graphics, the channel where we take Bitcoin topics and summarize them in infographics. Today we are talking about, is Bitcoin wasteful of energy? And here's today's infographic. The title is Bitcoin mining energy consumption. And first aspect of it is that it replaces the energy intensive financial system. For example, gold mining and banking institutions, which are orders of magnitude greater than Bitcoin's energy consumption. Number two, Bitcoin mining consumes mostly surplus renewable energy, 75%. Third is that Bitcoin mining directly secures the network in proportion to the amount of computing power directed towards mining. Fourth, Bitcoin mining drives profitability and innovation in clean energy. So we're talking solar, hydroelectric, geothermal, and wind power. Also, Bitcoin mining creates massive value and utility, and it also leads to second and third order conservation effects. So let's dive in one at a time. First, we'll go with it replaces the energy intensive financial system. So this is comparing Bitcoin's energy consumption to that of gold mining and traditional banking institutions. And we'll go to a couple quotes, and this is mostly from Dan Held. His article, Proof of Work is Efficient. So he says Bitcoin's utilization and excess electrical capacity consumes magnitudes less electricity than existing fiat systems, which not only have power requirements banking infrastructure, a little bit of a grammatical error there, but the military and political machina. The energy trade-off for the utilization of that electricity to secure the financial system backbone is a net positive outcome. So basically he's saying it's better or less energy intensive to use Bitcoin than it is traditional existing fiat systems. And so we can see that here. This is 2018 data. Bitcoin mining costs $4.5 billion. You can compare that to the banking system, which is over 400 times greater. You can compare it towards gold mining, which was over 20 times greater, and that doesn't even take into account transportation costs. So, moving on to the next point is that Bitcoin mining consumes mostly surplus renewable energy. So this we're going to go to the Little Bitcoin book written by a host of Bitcoin beasts. And we'll go to a couple quotes. The majority of Bitcoin mining today is done with renewable energy that has minimal cost to the environment. According to the latest estimates, about 75% of all Bitcoin mining is currently done with hydroelectric, solar, wind, and geothermal sources of energy. And just before that, it says, mining is both a mobile and low margin business. Therefore, mining companies have an especially large incentive and ability to physically seek out the cheapest possible electricity. So yeah, these miners, they can literally plug in or unplug and move to where the cheapest source of energy is. And it's a low margin business. And so they're highly incentivized to find the lowest cost electricity, which is generally surplus energy. And it's generally going to be energy that is not going to be efficiently transported to the grid. Julian has a great tweet here. He says, energy grids are in nature inefficient. It's impossible to transport electrical energy over long distances. Because of this, approximately 6% of the US energy production is wasted because of losses alone, just about 3.5 times the total energy consumption of the Bitcoin network. So if we want to talk about actual wastefulness, actually wasting electricity comes in the transportation of that electricity. That's where a lot of electricity is lost. And so that's why Bitcoin mining, the fact that they move very close to the sources of energy, minimizes the amount of waste. We can go on to another stat. The amount of electricity consumed every year by always on but inactive home devices in the USA alone could power the Bitcoin network for 2.5 years. So it's just a matter of how we're looking at it. Yeah, Bitcoin consumes as much energy as a small country, but then there's other ways to look at it that kind of frame it in a way that Bitcoin is, proportionally not using as much energy as compared to the amount that we waste in other areas. Then this is a big block of text, but it's worth reading. This is from a recent paper, 2021 Horizon Scan of Emerging Global Biological Conservation Issues. And it says, stranded energy refers to energy generation that is no longer economically or logistically viable. For example, methane byproducts that have low economic value are frequently vented or flared from oil wells rather than combusted to produce energy. Excess energy from hydropower, wind turbines, or solar panels also are forms of stranded energy. Innovation to increase use of stranded energy is focused on decentralization of the grid and alternative means of energy storage. An emerging novel use of stranded energy is Bitcoin mining, the process that secures the Bitcoin network by solving complex algorithms. Bitcoin mining uses 45 to 60 terawatt hours of electricity per year, and because it's extremely competitive, relies on cheap energy to remain profitable. On-site Bitcoin mining, which can occur from any location with an internet connection, delivers a highly liquid global market for otherwise stranded energy formed from renewable and non-renewable sources. So we'll come back to this on a later point too, that the fact that Bitcoin mining can capitalize on this type of energy will actually drive innovation and profitability of those sources of energy. Moving on to the next point, the energy used for Bitcoin mining directly secures the network. So the little Bitcoin book says Bitcoin miners provide security for the network. The energy used to secure the ledger can be compared to the cost of creating and maintaining a high security vault that protects 200 billion in assets. Now it's more like 420 billion in assets. And I think this is cool because it's an interesting point because we need to recognize that the value of Bitcoin comes from the fact that it is a monetary network. We usually think of money as being the currency, and then we think of payment networks as being the monetary network, like PayPal or Swift or something like that. But Bitcoin is the currency, and it's also the network. And so obviously we need the network to be extremely secure. And it's almost like the currency on the network doesn't have value unless the network has value. So we can think of Facebook as being a social network. The information on there is not going to be valuable unless it has the power of the social network behind it. So another way to look at this is that if an attacker, a bad actor, wanted to attack the network and manipulate the most recent block and do fraudulent transactions, they would have to be running over 51% of the computing power on the Bitcoin network. So the larger amount of computing power invested in the network, the harder it is to attack. So you'd have to have a massive, massive amount of power just to manipulate one block. And then it's also, as a side note, it's very, it's kind of pointless to do that. So it's highly incentivized not to do that because it's extremely costly to do something like that and very difficult to accomplish. And by compromising the network, theoretically you would want to, manipulate transactions so that it would benefit you and you would accumulate Bitcoin. But then you would compromise the network and basically make it valueless. So back to the main point. We'll go back to Dan Held. He says the Bitcoin ledger can only be immutable if and only if it is costly to produce. The fact that proof of work is costly is a feature and not a bug. We should be grateful that there is a massive amount of energy going into proof of work for Bitcoin. Next, I think this is really cool, the fact that Bitcoin mining actually drives profitability and innovation in clean energy. So recapping, miners use stranded energy, geothermal, hydroelectric, or natural gas that would otherwise be vented into the atmosphere. Jack Dorsey, he is the CEO of Square and Twitter. He says, we believe that cryptocurrency will eventually be powered completely by clean power, eliminating its carbon footprint and driving adoption of renewables globally. Nick Carter has a great way of thinking about it. He says, this global energy net liberates stranded assets and makes new ones viable. Imagine a 3D topographic map of the world with cheap energy hotspots being lower and expensive energy being higher. I imagine Bitcoin mining being akin to a glass of water poured over the surface, settling in the nooks and crannies and smoothing it out. Awesome stuff. In the Little Bitcoin book, they say the revenue generated makes production and research of hydroelectric power more profitable, encouraging its use. In this way, Bitcoin mining subsidizes hydroelectric power. Mining may also incentivize more solar, wind, and geothermal energy production. Love it. Then, when we're trying to decide if a technology wastes energy or if any sort of electricity use is wasteful, we should look at the value that it's creating. If electricity is the input, what is the output? And with Bitcoin, it creates massive value and utility. That's why it's being organically selected as, the Bitcoin consumes 0.2% of the world's energy. In the Little Bitcoin book, they say historically, new technology uses more energy than old systems that they displace. So we can think of this in the terms of that, washing machines use more energy than, the traditional way of washing your clothes. However, they add a lot of value and productivity to our life and give us back tons of time when we see it as worth it. Now, what is Bitcoin's utility and value? Well, it solves the store of value problem for individuals as well as for institutions. We're all looking to preserve our purchasing power over space and time, and that's why we look to things like gold, bonds, equities, real estate, art, things like that, because we want to store our value. Bitcoin does this immaculately. We can check, what the long-term purchasing power or value of Bitcoin has been over the last 10 years. This is the 200 weekly moving average, and it has never decreased ever, even once. It also provides massive amount of utility in banking the unbanked. There are billions and billions of people that we don't consider that do not have access to banking, and they do not have the security of being able to save money, but they do have an internet connection, and if they can access the Bitcoin network, they can begin to take control of their financial future. And then another instance is remittances. I mean, think about it. You have some of the poorest people in the world sending money back to their family and getting taxed or charged a premium of 20 to 25%. So we're basically taking advantage of the poorest people in the world. And this is just the beginning of, the use cases for Bitcoin. Moving on to the final piece of the puzzle, Bitcoin causes second and third order conservation effects. So this is conservation, on a personal level and on an institutional governmental level. On a personal level, it makes saving possible again. We can check what the value of USD has been over the last 70 years. It's lost 90% of its purchasing power. And if we're expecting to hold US dollars, we can reasonably expect that this will happen again over the next 70 years. Our current dollars will be worth 10% in purchasing power at best, by the time our grandkids are around. And then on a governmental level, and then compare, holding US dollars to holding the asset that is constantly going up. And then on a governmental level, Bitcoin directly defunds the ability to go to war. That's from Dan Held. Without getting into it too much, if governments don't have the ability to create money and fund projects and things like going to war without, taxing their citizens, it's going to avoid things like unnecessary war. And in conclusion, a great quote at the end of Dan Held's piece, he says, is the trustless settlement of 1.34 trillion between counterparties annually with the added benefit of cheaper energy for all worth the 4.5 billion in current mining costs? I think the answer is a resounding yes. And one more thing from Saifedean, he says, if people find that electricity is worth paying for, the electricity has not been wasted. So is Bitcoin mining a waste of energy? It's totally subjective. Let me know what you think. Put it down in the comments, and we will see you next time at Cryptographic.